We begin today's program with a sit down with Francis Hallworth. She's the Executive Director of United Way Niagara. Francis, you've just kicked off your campaign for 2021. Better than normal is the theme. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think for many of us, we've had different experiences with COVID. And so I've been very lucky that I've been able to continue work as many other people did. But as you know, there are a lot of people whose lives were very disrupted by COVID. And so when we say, oh, we all want to get back to normal, normal is 1 in 7 people living in poverty in Niagara. It's 60,000 people not having enough food to eat. It's over 600 people trying to find a place at night to sleep in a park or a parking lot. So getting back to normal is not good enough.
Not good enough at all.
Absolutely. And I believe we can do better as a community if we work together.
It's a great theme, and I love that theme. How do you explain it to people as this campaign rolls out?
I think many people understand. So many of our donors understand that, you know, their jobs have continued. They've been able to continue to receive their paycheck, and they understand those who haven't. And so if you were already challenged prior to COVID, can you only imagine the added complexity to someone's life now?
What have you heard from some of the member agencies that you deal with about poverty and homelessness and affordable housing, all of these issues that clients to these services need?
There's been a number of things that have happened. So one of the things is just housing. So housing in general, we have pretty well a zero vacancy rate. We know the cost of rent is skyrocketing. So when people can't pay their rent or can barely pay their rent, it's not good for anyone. They either end up losing their home or their apartment, which then puts them into the shelter system, which is already overloaded. And if they can pay their rent, then we end up with food as an issue because they pay the rent, but they can't pay the bills.
Tough choices have to be made.
Really, really tough choices. And so then what happens is our agencies see more people coming in to try and scrape by the best they can. And so food banks were overwhelmed with many people for the very first time showing up at a food bank. And that's a really tough thing to do for the first time, is to walk in there because you could have been a donor. And so now you're walking in there asking for help. So when you combine those two things with, you know, people with limited income, skyrocketing rents, the inability to put food on the table, that's on top of any existing problems they had. And then, so I kind of divide things into, so that is one half of it. So the second half, and I'm sure you've heard this, is the social isolation that people were experiencing. So those who were living alone, those who were elderly, and we know that's not good for anyone's well-being.
United Way has some services that help people to bridge the gap when they're facing these poverty issues, these homelessness issues. What are some of those initiatives?
Right. So we often try to look at things in two ways. So one is, what's the short-term solution and what can we do to help? But we also have to be working on a bit of a longer-term solution. So, I mean, the amount of resources that we have put into food banks and meal programs skyrocketed during COVID. But at the same time, we're also looking at a longer range plan, and we're leading the Niagara Food Security Network, which is all of the organizations across Niagara who serve food, operate a food bank. What could we do better together as a group to ensure that everyone in Niagara has healthy food? And that's a very lofty goal, but we have a pretty amazing membership group. So when we were talking about social isolation, is one, let's make sure everyone is aware of 211, because they're a magical resource as far as I'm concerned. You can call and ask any question you want.
United Way funded organization?
Yes, it is. And the people who answer the phone are trained to help figure out. So you might call for one issue, but really you have 2 or 3 more, and they're able to talk you through that and connect you properly.
We all have those issues where we're thinking we need to talk to somebody about this, or we need to find out more information, and sometimes we don't know where to turn, and 211 gives us that sort of clearinghouse opportunity.
Absolutely, and they are really good at what they do. But when you say that, when people don't know where to turn, mental health is definitely an issue. It was an issue before COVID, but we were able to invest in more virtual counseling because the one-on-one counseling was shut down. But it doesn't mean that people don't have really severe issues that they need to talk to someone about. Reminding people about Distress Center. It's open 24 hours a day. People can call anytime they want for support.
131,000 plus people turned to United Way services last year in 2020. Yeah. That's more than a quarter of Niagara's population.
So if you think about the programs that we're still running, so we think about the schools being shut down, but that didn't stop us from working with nutrition partners to make sure that gift cards got to some of the families that were actually struggling the most. And you may know about our after school programs, which we could no longer do in person, and we were doing them virtually, but we were also with a group of volunteers ensuring that a bag of groceries and some activities for the kids were dropped off on their doorstep once a week. So we were doing the best we could when most of the world was going virtual.
And we know that even though we feel that we're making some progress against COVID-19, these issues are not going to stop. And some of those people who lost their jobs during COVID-19 may not be able to return back to work.
Absolutely. And I know that the unemployment rate has certainly come down a bit since the beginning of COVID. But what I last read, it's still at about 10%. That's still a lot of people who are out of work. And we're all hearing about when CERB ends and what happens when the rent assistance ends and the assistance to employers. It's a pretty scary time for people.
Would you say that the 2021 campaign is more important than any other United Way campaign that you've been involved in?
I do. So looking at it in two ways. So first is the increased number of people who need assistance and how complex their problems are and the types of services they need. And the second is looking at it from an agency point of view. Everyone's had to pivot. Everyone's had to figure out, how do I still serve the clients that are coming through the door throughout COVID? And what we've been trying to do is we substantially increased our emergency fund for agencies. So we didn't want anyone to be stuck. If they needed help pivoting to a more virtual or even just increasing the protocols they had in place to keep everybody safe. So there was an opportunity for agencies to get some emergency funding to serve the increased people that are coming through their door.
Francis, good luck on this year's campaign. We hope you reach your targets. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.